Today is February 10th, 2015. My name is Edna Sussman. I'm a reference librarian here at the Half Hollow Hills Community Library in Dix Hills, New York. We are interviewing Irving J. Weiss, a World War II U.S. Army veteran, as part of our Veterans Testimonial Project and in collaboration with the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Thank you so much, Irving, for being here today and participating in our project. Irving, where and when were you born?
I was born in New York City, September 11th, 1921.
And who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My father was Max Weiss. He was born in Austria-Hungary, and he came to America when he was a boy. He served in the pioneers, which were the engineers in World War I. Wow. And he was he was, I don't remember the exact position, but he worked in the children's dress industry.
Oh.
In charge of the plant.
Mm-hmm. In America?
In New York City.
Uh-huh. And your mom?
And my mom was a forelady in a children's dress manufacturing plant. Mm-hmm. And she was born in the town of Nyezhin in the Ukraine, mm-hmm. And came to America when she was 2 years old.
Mm-hmm. And what was her name?
And her name was Rose Weiss, Rose Kirsch.
Uh-huh.
And his name was Max Weiss.
Okay. Did you want to change your glasses? It's okay. So, and also, what about your siblings? What were their names?
I am an only child.
Oh.
I begged my mother to give me a sister, but she somehow forgot that I kept begging her.
Okay. And what were you doing before you entered the service?
I was going to the University of Michigan. I went first to Brooklyn College for a year after high school, and that was in 1939. And then after, in order to make enough money to continue my studies, I then, after a year out of college, went to the University of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And I got a BA in English in 1942.
During your service time?
No, I got no, I did not go into the Army. I didn't get drafted until I graduated.
Oh, I see. It says your service dates were 1941 to 45.
Oh, I'm sorry. Service dates were 1941, yes. Actually,
your BA?
I got my BA in 1941. Ah. I had to rush to do it because I knew that I would be inducted into the Army in November 1941.
I see.
And so I had to hurry up and take lots of courses in the summer.
And what was your major?
My major was English.
English. And which branch of the military did you serve?
I served in the Army of the United States. Now going down from there, Army of the United States. After basic training, I was in the 95th Infantry Division Artillery.
Wow, okay. You were enlisted or drafted?
I was drafted.
Drafted. So you didn't have a choice of which branch?
I didn't have a choice. Well, I can say more about that, but in any case, I had no choice. I realized after basic training that I was going to be in the artillery of the 95th Infantry Division.
Okay. And what happened when you departed for training camp and during your early days of training? And where was it located, the training camp?
I started at Camp Upton, New York, and then basic training continued No, I think my basic training was in Upton, and then I was sent to Austin, Texas, and it was there that I was assigned to the 95th Infantry Division Artillery.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, headquarters battery. In other words, 95th Division Infantry Division Artillery Headquarters Battery.
How long were you in Texas for the training?
We were in Texas. We were in Texas until actually, as a member of the 95th Infantry Division Artillery, we went to different places for different kinds of training throughout the United States.
Oh.
And in other words, a part of the time we went to California for desert training.
Oh, I see.
And then we went to West Virginia for mountain training. And I may have forgotten a few others. We were in Camp Shelby, Louisiana for whatever training. I forgot.
How long a period do you think?
Well, so we were in the States. We were in the States until let's see, D-Day was 1944 on June 4th, and we embarked for Europe. Somewhat before D-Day.
I see.
And that is to say, we went to England.
Okay, and the training, though, how long was the training?
The training, we were trained ever since I entered ever since I was assigned to the 95th Division, which was in late 1941, until 1944, we were trained we stayed in the United States for 3 years.
Oh, I see.
Or 2.5 years.
Right.
And we served in the European theater of war for a year and a half.
I see.
Until the end of the war with Germany, which was May 5th or 8th. I can't remember the exact date.
Right. Do you recall your instructors in basic training? What were they like?
What were they like? Well, if you're assigned to an infantry division and you're in the artillery, you're in a battery. If you're an infantryman, you're assigned to a company. And the battery consisted of about 100 men. And in that battery, I was assigned to the message center.
Oh. Which did what?
It was the center for all kinds of messages that were intended for the head of the battalion, who was a lieutenant colonel. And when you asked me about my instructors, the head of the message center was the sergeant major of the battery, which is the highest enlisted position apart from the battery sergeant. I'm forgetting the exact title.
That's fine.
Down somewhere.
That's okay.
And I didn't find anything wrong with any of them.
Okay.
I knew I was living a life on which I was constantly alert to everything that was going on around me, because I was stuck, and I tried to find out how to make the best of everything around me, and gradually began to learn what an artillery battery was like. In other words, an artillery battery, the one that I was assigned to, and that it was usually then attached to the infantry companies, consisted of 4 batteries of 105 millimeter howitzers. A howitzer is the kind of artillery piece that fires on a trajectory. It fires over the heads of the infantry to attack the nearest enemy positions facing the infantry and carefully avoiding firing too close to the infantry. But it isn't. The intention of the battery is to make it easier for the infantry to go forward against the enemy infantry by paving the way for our infantry to make headway.
So eliminate their infantry.
It eliminates their infantry. Sometimes it is assigned to fire even further ahead, depending upon the situation that you were in. Which means that the Germans, who had a wonderful field artillery piece known as the 88, which could be used as an anti-aircraft gun when it was fired on a high trajectory, and could be used as a rifle to fire straight across. It was much feared by all its opponents.
Were your not missiles? Were your guns, I guess?
Well, call them howitzers.
Howitzers. Were they effective against those of the Germans?
Well, they must have been, because we won the war.
Yeah, I guess. Okay.
Well, no. If I can expand on what happened.
Sure.
We were also, the 95th Infantry Division was assigned to the 3rd Army, commanded by General Patton. And as soon as I mentioned Patton's name, people who are still familiar, or then were familiar with him, know that he was known for commanding his troops to go forward at a fast pace. We were in Patton's army, and we proceeded almost every day. We made progress. But when the Battle of the Bulge took place in December of 1944, that was in the area north of where we were in the southern part of France and Germany, the period known as the area known as Saarlautern in German, and if you remember the terms Alsace-Lorraine, sure. We were in the Lorraine part. The reason I mention it is because that area was, depending upon what period you happen to be referring to in the 19th century, in the conflicts between France and Germany in the 19th century, whoever won got it, and whoever. So it was sometimes French, sometimes German, and the people who had lived there were pretty well bilingual.
I see.
And so we then, in December, we were detached from the 3rd Army and sent north to relieve the battered 5th Division, which was the one that the unexpectedly met prepared German resistance in the area opposite Belgium.
I see.
Attacking them in the northern part of Europe. And one reason why we couldn't make headway and why the Germans were so successful against the 5th Division, against the American lines, was because the days were clouded, so that the airplanes, the cloud cover prevented our attacking them with airplanes. Oh. Once the cloud cover was removed, we were able to recover and go forward. And we were sent, our division and other divisions in the Third Army were sent north to relieve them. But by the time we got there, in the bitter cold December weather, by the time we got there, we were already making headway. But we were then assigned to another army. I forget which number it was.
I see.
So we did not return to the Third Army.
And we
proceeded then to go east in Germany until the end of the war.
I see. By caravans of trucks.
Well, yes,
tanks
we had to. Whenever we had to move, whenever we had to move as an artillery unit, the infantry were either carried by the 2.5-ton trucks, or they marched there. They walked there. We were always assigned to 2.5-ton trucks, and assigned to some of them pulled the howitzers, and if we had to go, if we made a lot of progress, we proceeded like that. Otherwise, our outfit walked, but the guns were always pulled by vehicles.
A lot of walking.
Yes, a lot of walking. Well, in the 19th century, wars or no wars, people walked all the time.
Right. So was this considered like specialized training to learn how to operate these weapons?
No, this is, in other words, if you were assigned, I was not assigned personally to a howitzer battery.
Oh.
I was in the headquarters battery. In a sense, laugh at it, we were the mind of the battery.
And what did you do?
What we did when we were in combat, there was a unit called the Fire Direction Center, and there were 4 or 5 soldiers who were tested for their ability to do trigonometry.
Wow.
And what they did was, let me go forward a bit, we were opposing the Germans. We sent our lieutenant observers, forward observers, to go as far forward as possible, ahead of our own infantry, to observe where we could fire best in order to effect, in order to help the infantry go forward.
So they like
scoped. Dangerous.
Yeah.
It was the most dangerous position in the artillery, to be a forward observer. And they were always commissioned officers, lieutenants, first or second lieutenants.
So they scoped out the field far ahead.
That's right. They scoped. They decided, for example, to report back by wire. And our unit had wire soldiers who were equipped and prepared to extend wire, telephone wire, forward through the infantry as far forward as possible, so that the lieutenant observer could get as close as possible to the enemy territory and tell us where to fire. And when they did that, then the Fire Direction Center would do the trigonometric calculation because to the 4 batteries, so that they would know exactly how to do this. This is what we did during training.
I see.
And after 3 years of training, they became specialized in firing the howitzers as they were supposed to do during conflict.
Were you working with the messaging?
Now, what I was doing, especially during these moments of fire, I was keeping a record of the fire, what the directions were in mathematical units, and what the effect was reported by the Lieutenant Observer, and I had to keep a regular record and write it out well. I might add that one reason I ended up doing this was because I was among the very few college graduates among the enlisted men. In other words, enlisted men are those of us who go from private to sergeant, and then commissioned officers, or we are also known as enlisted men, non-commissioned officers, and commissioned officers. Mm-hmm. And this was in 1941, and I discovered, to my surprise and even amazement, that how many of the young men who were enlisted had not gone to high school, or very few of them were college graduates. So, and since I was an English major, anything that had to be written carefully, mm-hmm. so that it could be depended upon to be accurate, seemed like the kind of thing to give Irving. Right. He ended up with writing and all kinds of things because that was my specialty. Right.
Now, if you had your degree, why wouldn't you have gone in as a commissioned?
That's a very good question. I took the test for commissioned officer twice, mm-hmm. and I failed it because I'm very bad at math. And it is a very good thing that I never became a lieutenant, because I wouldn't have led my men in the right direction.
I see. Okay, good. Now, how did you adapt to military life, including the physical regimen, barracks, food, social life?
I had no difficulty with the physical regimen and the social life. One of the things that struck me very early was many of the men. Let me start even further back.
Sure.
I came in with 100 men from New York City. Mm-hmm. When we were asked how many of you can drive, 5 people could drive.
Oh, wow.
But the other guys were from Texas, Oklahoma, other far reaches of the U.S. And one of the noticeable things for us New Yorkers was how stunted in growth they seemed. Huh. Because this was the ending years of the Depression. The Dust Bowl had ravaged the U.S. Mm-hmm. Food shortages, people were starving in all kinds of places, so that we were surprised to see that those of us who came from New York, people of our age, 18 to 20, roughly, physically they were very good, mm-hmm. but they simply they had not grown to the extent that we had, mm-hmm. living on good diets.
Right. Oh, interesting. Oh.
And the other interesting thing, since I was always interested in, when I was in college, I studied foreign languages. Mm-hmm. I minored in ancient Greek. Mm-hmm. I studied a year of Italian, a year of German, and 1 semester of French, mm-hmm. Because I wanted to be proficient in other languages.
Sorry, what school was this?
This was at the University of Michigan.
Uh-huh.
So I studied languages as much as possible. When I was drafted, I was asked about my linguistic ability, but I didn't know French or German well enough to speak it fluently. Right. I could read both languages, uh-huh. but I couldn't really speak well. So I was never assigned to that. But I'm going to complicate this further. In Louisiana, often Army units are sent for training to Louisiana to what are called Louisiana maneuvers. In other words, Louisiana was chosen by the Army to do practice warfare. In other words, you would be assigned to to imitate being in war, in combat.
I wonder why Louisiana. What?
Well, I don't know why Louisiana either, but it has all. It may be that it has all kinds of different terrain.
I see. Would you like some water?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Hold on. Let me open this for you. Good. It's very full. Oh.
Oh, no, it's spilled.
It's all right. I got it. There we go. Okay.
Ho 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 ho. Okay.
Good.
I think that was a good suggestion.
Good. So Louisiana.
All right. So I mentioned that because it's a good example of the kinds of different training that we had.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Imitation warfare is what we actually what we did in Louisiana.
Were there barracks there too?
No. When we went out in the field to any place, you were assigned. We were in Camp Shelby, Louisiana, or Mississippi. Well, whatever camp it was, where we had. Well, we either lived in tents or barracks, and then when we went out into the field, we slept on the ground.
Oh, wow! How was the food?
How was the food? I didn't think of complaining about the food because I did not want to be drafted. I did not want to be drafted, but I wanted to leave home as soon as possible because one of my hopes was to, if there were no war, to go abroad.
You wanted to go abroad?
I wanted to go abroad. So any time that we were sent to another new place in the U.S. or Europe was what I really preferred.
I see.
I would almost say enjoyed being there. But what I wanted to say was that at some time before we went overseas, I read in Time magazine that students were taken out of students who were going to college were taken out and given special training of different kinds. It was a program, the initials were ASTP, but I don't remember what they stood for. But it was for students who had not yet graduated, and they sent them to study Japanese, intensive study of Japanese or other languages or other kinds of studies, and then they sent them to units as specialists.
Okay.
And when I learned about the program, I wrote a letter to the head of the program in Washington, and I was then a technical corporal. It's a different position from straight corporal.
I see.
But never mind explaining it at the moment. I wrote a letter, and 2 days later, the colonel who headed the battalion, the artillery battalion, Colonel Hopkins, came over to my tent and asked for Corporal Weiss. And when he got to me, he said, "Do you not know that any communication that you send out to anyone else in the service outside of a friendly letter to someone that you know has to go through channels?
Oh.
It has to be censored.
Oh.
All material, anything you sent out was looked at. You could not send out anything. I mean, they censored your mail to home, but they didn't take it. It was not a big deal.
Right.
But if you wanted to write to a colonel in Washington and head of a unit, while you were in a different unit, you had to go through channels.
Oh.
and I wanted to get out of his outfit.
So he obviously got it from you. He got the letter.
So yes, and what he did was he didn't do it physically, but I had to take my stripes off. In other words, my stripe was one bar like this, and it had to be taken.
Permanently?
No, well, for the moment,
it
didn't. We didn't know how long the war would last. We didn't know what I would do next. So I went back to being a private.
Oh, wow. As a punishment. Was that like a punishment?
Well, yes. No. Yeah. Well, the punishment consists of reducing your rank because you offended the one of the articles of war, which required that any enlisted man who tries to communicate with some member of the army of another unit has to get permission to do so.
Oh.
That is what he meant by going through channels.
So I guess you weren't accepted into the language program.
No. So I never got accepted into the language program. But during the time that I was in Europe, there were occasions when my immediate French was useful and my immediate German was useful.
Great. So you did serve abroad.
And I served abroad. Yes, I served abroad from landing in England from something like May 44 to August 45.
Okay, and you were on the front lines. I guess, or not?
The problem about using the word front line is that it's a term that really was useful during World War I. But since World War II was always conducted with airplanes, and there was also infantry, it does refer to the place where the infantry of one unit meets the enemy unit. That's the front line.
Okay.
But insofar as the two, your unit and the enemy unit is also trying to shell each other, then the front line extends to anywhere that you can be killed by shells or bombs or infantry rifles. So yes, the artillery usually is situated about 1,000 yards behind the infantry.
I see.
And so although we never encountered, because we were constantly winning, except for the debacle of the Bulge, when the German infantry overran the American infantry, whenever we were confronting the Germans and we had stopped to fire our howitzers, we could be hit by German 88s at any time, and we were often. In other words, we learned gradually that combat for us meant that if you heard a shell overhead, you didn't have to lie down, because once you heard it, then it was passing overhead.
Oh, I see.
But that didn't mean that they were not. The enemy was not trying to find out where to center their, because they'd fire one shell over here and then fire another shell over there, and then they'd adjust their fire according to their forward observers.
I see.
So we never knew when we would be hit. When we heard the shells coming over, it made us very nervous because we didn't know how it would continue.
Right.
And there were some times when their firing was so accurate that all but the howitzer units, all but the howitzer batteries, were looking for shelter.
Wow.
And shelter meant don't get anywhere where something can fall on you.
So what kind of shelter?
Yes. Well, the main thing was German 88s. We rarely were attacked by German airplanes.
Oh.
We were attacked several times by what is called friendly fire. Our own airplanes missed their target, and we had to take cover.
Did you lose soldiers?
Our unit, our artillery unit, only lost one man while the time we were there. Some were wounded, but if you ask me the question about losing soldiers, I'll extend it to the extent of saying the infantry in its main battles. The first one that the 95th Infantry is famous for is the capture of the fortress of Metz, which is on the borderline between Germany and France in the Alsace-Lorraine area. And they had to relieve the unit that had started there because it was a very bad situation. When I'm jumping very far forward in this, during the entire time that the 95th Infantry Division was in combat, we lost a good many infantrymen, a good many people in the infantry. And now I'm skipping. When we returned to the United States in the late spring of 1945,
right,
we were scheduled to be sent to Japan.
Oh, wow.
Because we were still fighting the Japanese. And what happened, at one point, the colonel, the lieutenant general who was the head of the 95th Infantry Division, called the infantry to send. He called the infantry to meet in a nearby football stadium, in which he was going to announce this. What happened was that the infantry assembled and then protested and then revolted against the orders of the general, because the infantry felt that it had suffered so much that it did not want to go to Japan.
Oh my!
And what happened then? Do you know President Kennedy's advisor, an American historian named Arthur B. Schlesinger?
Sure.
Okay. Tom Schlesinger, his brother, was in my outfit.
Oh wow!
So when we learned of what had happened, Tom asked. By that time, I was sergeant major. When I left, in other words, I started as a private. I went to corporal. I was busted as a corporal, but all the way through, I ended up as the sergeant major of the 358th Field Artillery Battalion. Wow. And so I was in charge of the office. And he said, "Can I use the office phone?" And what he wanted to do was to call his brother and tell his brother about the revolt of the infantry. And what his brother did was get in touch with Walter Winchell, whose name I'm sure you remember.
Yes.
With Walter Winchell, and I have a clipping from, I don't remember what newspaper, which says 95th Infantry Division revolts.
Wow.
And what happened?
Let me ask. Schlesinger at the time, his brother, was he in a high position? This was in the 40s.
This was, it was in 45.
45. So what was?
He was famous because he had published, I think, early in the spring, he had published his first book on the age of Jackson.
Oh, I see.
Which made him famous.
I see.
And so that's what happened.
Okay.
But what happened, of course, was that on August 8th, or whenever I don't remember the date, I woke up. Someone came over to my bed early in the morning and said, "The war is over.
Oh, wow.
We dropped the atom bomb."
Wow.
So we never had to go.
Wow.
But we were. That was the time when I guess I was most fearful. After I got used to being shelled, then there's nothing you can do about it. You get used to it.
Okay. That was my question, too. Were you ever fearful of
yes, there were times in any case, that was. There were times. I'll give you one example. The 88s were coming. The shells were coming over. We were supposed to bivouac in a certain place at night, and we were assigned. And my outfit was assigned to a house, and we had beds on the cellar floor, beds in the cellar, but the ceiling was made up of some kind of part cement blocks that were attached, but they were not. In other words, it was not the ceiling was not one substance.
Okay.
It was these separate blocks. And we had a choice of either sleeping there with those blocks above us while the Germans were firing and the 88s were hitting near us, or on the first floor. Well, the best thing, of course, is to get as low as possible to the ground, but those things might fall on you.
Right.
Or you go upstairs and get on the first floor. So in other words, we always had to decide where we were going to sleep while we were being shelled.
Wow. Oh, it's a crapshoot kind
yes.
of thing. Yeah.
So yes, I was at the times I was scared. Definitely, yeah, I was very scared. And the way in which I reacted to being scared was that I remember I tended to yawn all the time, but I was not scared so that I was driven. I mean, I was able to live through it.
Right.
And thank God that I wasn't in the infantry, because I didn't. I mean, the artillery was assigned not rifles, but a gun called a carbine. It was a small one, and there was never any need to use it because we were never overrun.
I see.
But if an outfit was overrun, like the 105th Division, that was the one. Well, I forget the numbers. In any case, the times that were most difficult to live through were the times when we were shelled intensively, and you didn't know quite. You just had to wait it out.
What the outcome would be.
Yes, because you were there.
So you witnessed destruction and casualties?
I witnessed destruction. Well, yes. Well, no, I didn't wish. I never saw any casualties, because the ones who were in headquarters battery, it was only the wire people, the guys who went out toward the front with the wire that were occasionally wounded. Though nobody in our battery was killed.
Were you wounded at any time?
No, I was not wounded by anything.
What kind of friendships and camaraderie did you form while serving, and with whom?
Well, I got along very well with the guys around me. Since I'm Jewish, I didn't look around to find other Jews, but I encountered some anti-Semitism.
You did in what way? Huh.
Well, the colonel's driver was a Polak who came from Chicago, and I knew he didn't like me, mainly because I was Jewish. But he didn't do anything. He didn't confront me. He just muttered under his breath.
Oh.
And there were a few other guys who simply did not, they didn't make remarks to me, but they made incidental remarks to others.
Really?
I did not try to find out among 100 men who else was Jewish, because I didn't necessarily want to. I mean, I grew up in neighborhoods in Brooklyn where not everybody was Jewish, and I wasn't an observant Jew. So, but the kind of anti-Semitism was occasionally annoying, but nothing that forced me to do things that I wouldn't ordinarily do.
I see. But so you got along well, basically, with most of the group.
I got along basically with most of the group, and I cannot even explain why I formed friends with certain of them, but I will briefly explain something that most people don't know. If I was in an infantry division in the artillery, and I say that artillery was located 1,000 yards behind the infantry, then we were always potentially in the front line.
Sure.
But who took care of our mail? Where did the mail get collected?
I was going to ask you that.
Who took care of all the paperwork?
Right.
Well, there was a whole unit devoted to things like that, sometimes located 15 miles away, who never even heard anything. In other words, when my friend, one of my closest friends, Al Nally, who lives in upstate New York, if he were here, he would say what he was, but he would have to say that, no, I didn't even hear any artillery fire.
I see.
So it's hard to ask a question because it's all graded to the extent to, and it's graded also according to how powerful you were at the moment. I had friends who were in Patton's army in North Africa because we hadn't penetrated Europe, and then they went up the boot of Sicily, and they were in much more of any unit that was there, including the artillery, had much more, were in much more danger than my outfit was, because we were so powerful after D-Day. We didn't land on June 6th. We landed sufficiently afterwards so that when the landing craft that took us from England to Europe told us, because the guys had been there, and we thank God that we hadn't been in the invasion.
Yeah, yeah. Huh. Speaking of mail, actually, how did you keep in touch with family and friends back home?
The mail came every few days, and was not too delayed. I mean, the American Army was very lucky in that respect. And one of the things that we learned by comparing ourselves to the Germans is that we spend a lot of time trying, even then, trying to make our soldiers comfortable as if they were living at home.
Nice.
No other army does it like that.
Yeah, really. Huh.
They try to reproduce. They spend lots of money on that.
So what did you do was there any chance for recreation, or were you off duty at any time?
Well, during combat, we occasionally, when we knew that we would not likely be needed, then we were able to go to a place. Sometime, I don't remember exactly how we did it, but we were able to take showers, let's say, once a week and a half. But we had no toilet facilities at any time because we were moving constantly.
Right.
So we had to adapt to sometimes sleeping in the ground. During the time we were in Patton's army, Patton, who was constantly foul-mouthed, constantly aggressive, used to send down to all the units typed material. He would have it typed out, and some of it read like this: "You guys are doing well, but remember, don't let the Germans live in their houses. Wherever you go, kick them out, and you guys sleep in the houses. No more digging foxholes when there are people living in houses."
Wow. Well, where did the people then go?
Well, we shepherded them over to barns and other places in the open.
I see. Huh.
Or there may be some. They have to live together in a few houses rather than everybody in his own home.
I see. Huh. Now, you had mentioned...
And it's hard to explain who I got friendly with, but I enjoyed the company of men that I would never have thought I would know otherwise, because you and I probably both know without thinking of it. As your education increases, you tend to, once you're out of school and whatever your position is, you tend to socialize with people of your own education. That's about the closest you can come to class.
Right.
To class divisions. But the surprise for me was not only were there one or two Jews around whom I didn't look to find because they were Jewish, but there were no college graduates around. So they would make fun of me occasionally and call me professor because I like to read and because I knew how to write well. But to my surprise, but actually not. I got my closest friends happened to be anybody who responded to me. When you were introduced to 5 new people, you know that some of them you really wouldn't want to know, and other people, all of a sudden you became friendly with them, and I found that kind of camaraderie unexpectedly in an evangelical Christian from Missouri that I met, mainly because when we talked to each other, we seemed to hit. I knew that he was an evangelical Christian, but when he spoke about the Bible, it wasn't difficult to talk to him about it, even because I knew the Bible pretty well. And so I discovered how open he was to talking about things. Nice. And so I made friends that I would never even meet in other circumstances.
Did you keep in touch with any of them?
Only for a short time afterwards. I mean, I'm a member of the 95th Infantry Division Association because at one time I have different ribbons that I was awarded, and I'll explain one of them to you.
Yes.
I have 3 bronze stars.
Wow.
But
congratulations. That's
out of the Army, you don't know that when the Bronze Star is awarded, there are 2 types of Bronze Stars. One is awarded for heroism, and the other is awarded for distinguished service.
I see.
Well, mine are not awarded for heroism. But if I say I have a Bronze Star and you don't know, I can fool you into thinking that I was really more involved than I actually was.
Well, distinguished service is a good thing too.
Well, yes, but how do you? I was helpful. I had people knew that I knew certain kinds of things. They were pretty automatically given to people that would be recognizable. I mean, there were some privates around who were just schnooks, and they didn't get any because none of the lieutenants knew them.
I see.
So in other words, as in any organization, if you know how the organization runs, and you can do things that will benefit you that other people might not think of, and that doesn't have to do with education. It has to do with your capacity to figure out how to be with other people. In other words, adaptable socialization.
Right. That's very interesting. Now, where were you when the war ended? You did mention you were in Europe.
When the German war ended.
Oh, right. Well,
because the war ended in 2 different places.
Right.
We were in Germany.
Yeah.
In eastern Germany, probably near Dortmund or Hamm, the 2 cities that I remember well. Actually, what happened then, on the day that the war with Germany ended, I got sick, and I don't remember what it was that I had a high fever, and they sent me to the medical unit in our outfit. And they said, it looks like, crazy enough, it looks like German measles.
Oh my gosh.
Now, I'd had American measles, and so they decided to send me to the next level unit where there were doctors and I could stay. So actually I was out for 3 or 4 days. Mm-hmm. And
what year was that?
This was in May 5th, 6th, and 7th of 1945. Okay. It was right after the war had just ended.
Got it. Okay.
And one of my best memories is that if a soldier is in a unit and he is not dissatisfied with the unit, I won't say enjoys being there,
right,
but he gets to know everybody. If he has to go to the hospital for any reason, he may be assigned to another unit.
When he gets out, you mean?
Yes, in other words, if his unit is moved,
right,
then what are they going to do with this guy who is well? Well, what the colonel did, he knew me then. He sent the major, who was second in command, in a command car to pick me up and take me back to my unit.
Oh, nice.
Because I was well known enough that he didn't want to lose me.
Nice, nice. Now, you said when war ended in Japan, when the bomb was dropped.
Well, when we got back to America, we were scheduled to go to Japan because the war was still continuing. And when the infantry was told this, that's when they revolted and they got into the newspapers. And luckily enough, they didn't have to go because they dropped
Where
the
were
bomb.
you at that time?
We were in Camp Shelby, Mississippi.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember the exact camp.
How did you return to the States by?
Well, now you see, if you remember, if I was busted at one point,
right,
and then I became message center sergeant, and then headquarters clerk, doing all the writing, I got to know the colonel very well, and again, when you talk about meeting people and you click, and other people you'd never get to know.
Do you remember his name?
Yes, Colonel. He was Colonel Lieutenant Colonel Shelby, Shelby, and he came from Shreveport, Louisiana.
Okay.
And he had served in Guadalcanal before he was assigned to the 95th Infantry Division Artillery. Mm-hmm. And from the very beginning, since I was as headquarters clerk, I had to get to know him and give him things. So every once in a while, he would look for me because when the Articles of War were amended and they sent them to him, I would be the one to make the amendation. He would call me over because he didn't understand something, and we clicked. Mm-hmm. Now, we knew each other. And even though he was God and I was nothing, so when the sergeant major, who had been an old army man, but we got along splendidly, he recommended that although I was then only a corporal again, that I replace him as sergeant major, which is the highest enlisted rank. In other words, it's that you saw that little
arm
patch. Mm-hmm. It's 3 above and 3 below.
Uh-huh.
So I was the one who had to close the camp. So when we were all dismissed, and when they closed out the 95th Infantry Division, and we were all sent home, mm-hmm. I had to make sure that everybody got off, mm-hmm. including the officers and the colonel. Uh-huh. I was the last person with another guy who was from another part of the outfit. I had to see to it that everything that went to the War Department went, and all the things that belonged to the unit in different places, uh-huh. and see to it that everybody got home.
So you
So I closed all the trunks. Yeah, I disbanded the entire headquarters.
And how did you get home?
By train.
By train.
Yeah.
How were you received by family and the community?
Well, the community didn't know me but my family was delighted that I was no longer in the Army.
Sure.
I remember when I went off when I went off to basic training, I remember I was saying goodbye to my father, and for the first time I saw him cry, because he had been in the Army,
Right.
and although he saw very little combat, he didn't know what would happen to me.
Sure, sure.
So and I'm an only child, so you can imagine how happy my parents were.
How was the readjustment to civilian life?
Not easy, because I did not want to live with my family. I didn't want to live at home in the depths of Brooklyn. I know Brooklyn is a place where you go to find a cheap house now. But I lived in the Flatbush section anyway. Well, never mind that. What I did as soon as I could, I used my GI Bill to pay for my further education, and I went to Columbia University. Part of the time, I simply went and bought bought an apartment of my own. And it's not that I would go home for a Friday night like a good Jewish boy and have dinner with my parents. But I had my own life.
Right. Now, did you finish a graduate degree at Columbia?
Yes, so I got my master's degree in comparative literature at Columbia University. And this has nothing to do with the Army, but I'll mention it. At that time, I don't know how it goes, what happened to it afterwards. I could, I had to register for courses, 15 credits of courses, for my degree, but I didn't have to attend classes. In other words, I did it on H credit, because I knew, and they knew, that the way in which I would get my degree would be to take a 2-hour exam. In my case, it was the 17th century literature. When they could ask me any question about it, because I was supposed to be a...
What is H? You said H.
H credit was the thing they called it when you don't have to go to class.
I see.
In other words, you're not tested on what you learned in that class. You just go for 1 year, and you get your master's on the basis of passing the test on the period that you're majoring in, and then on another 2-hour test in English literature. And I was I was snotty enough to think that I didn't have to go to class, because I did not want to sit in a class.
Okay.
And so I got my master's degree.
And then what did you do with that?
Well, after I got my degree, I worked for I forget the name of the airline. It no longer exists. I worked as an information clerk for an airline. I then worked for an encyclopedia publisher.
Oh.
And in which well, never mind what I did there.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, okay. What we had to do was re-edit the Appleton Century Cyclopedia of Names, which had been out of print for God knows how long. And I was hired as a rewrite. In other words, I would get a biography from, what would it be, the National, I can't remember the name of the large encyclopedia, a biography of a famous person.
Britannica, maybe? Britannica?
No, it wasn't Britannica, because that was British. We wanted an American one for the Century Cyclopedia of Names. First, I was working on Americans.
Okay.
So if I got the longest biography, the most authoritative one on, let's say, Louisa May Alcott, I would have to reduce it to 100 words. So I spent my time reducing long, supposedly authoritative biographies, so it could be put in this canned biographical system, by reducing it to 100 words.
Well, you really used your writing.
Well, yeah, my writing and my
literature.
I did about, I was able to accomplish about 10 of them a day.
Wow.
And I met a woman there who was married, but she was going to get an annulment. And as we talked to each other at lunch, we realized that we had a real affinity for each other. And I decided, I had been thinking of it, I was watching then the Italian movies that were first coming out, Roma Città Aperta with Anna Magnani and other ones. And I decided that I wanted to go to Italy to study at the Centro Cinematografica in Cinecittà. It was the only movie school that existed in the world. There were no movie schools. You didn't teach movies in 1945, 46, 47. It was 45. It was the late 40s. The only other one was in the Soviet Union, and I could have gone there, but I've never been politically interested, but I belonged to groups that were left-wing, anti-Stalinist socialists.
Right.
And so I wouldn't go there. And so she said, sure, she'd go with me. So she arranged with her father, who was a lawyer, to get an annulment from her husband. And I'll make it more interesting by saying her name was Anne Dubois de la Vergne. In other words, she wasn't Jewish, but she was married to a Jew. But she wanted to get an annulment.
No children. They had no children.
They had no children. And so she went with me to Italy, and we were in Italy for 5 years, and we had 2 children while we were in Italy, and I had a completely different life. I did not end up, when we got married, we had to get married in a justice, in a judicial office.
In Italy?
In Italy.
Right.
Actually, it was on the, in Rome, in the Campidoglio. There was a little place where there was a museum on one side and the judicial offices on this side. And as he started to the proceedings, he stopped and he said, "Mi dispiace, signor, ma lei non capisce italiano sufficiente bene per continuare con questo processo." In other words, you don't know Italian well enough for me to feel safe continuing. So I said, how about, in Italian, I said, how about finding someone who speaks French? And he said, well, we can get one of the guards from the museum over there. So I was married in Italy, in French, through someone who spoke French, and then I was translated into Italian.
Great story. When did you come back to the States with your family?
It got to the point, I taught for a while in an American dependent school in Naples. In other words, our American Navy was still there, and the students of the Navy personnel were going to an American school, and some Americans had gone to Italy to teach, and I learned through, I forget how, that they were looking for a 7th and 8th grade teacher to teach in a converted Italian bar in the same classroom. Now, I had never taught before, but somehow the Army and other kinds of things gave me the confidence that I would be able to do it. And so I worked there as a teacher, and I was paid then, I don't know, it was something like $5,000 a year.
How old were these students?
This was 7th and 8th grade. So And I learned how to teach the 7th grade while the 8th grade did things in the same room.
Same room.
And change it all the time, shift it all the time.
Wow.
And as you may or not remember, the girls are sexually developing,
right,
and the boys are not.
Right.
So it was a hard class to do. So I did that. But I enrolled at the University of Naples to study art on the GI Bill.
Oh,
it was still, I used it for a year at Columbia, but I still could use it.
Wonderful.
And then I started writing poetry and publishing in America.
Oh.
And we were able to live there.
How long? When did you come back?
Well, we came back in 54. My wife was pregnant for the 3rd time, and I came back. We came back then. Mainly, my wife wanted to stay. She was a lot more courageous than I. I said, "Look, here I am, 25 or so. I haven't even started a career, and so I'm getting a little worried about how I'm going to manage in the U.S." I regret that I didn't stay there.
Stay, really?
But in any case, that's the reason we came back.
So you had a daughter at the time and a son?
We had 2 children.
Yeah.
And they were both born with midwives. And one of them was born in the house.
What, a girl or boys? Or?
There were 2 girls.
And the 3rd one was born here?
The 3rd one was born here. And when we got here, we were living on 110th Street, just before Harlem, near Columbia. And my wife said, when I do not want to go to a hospital. I want to have midwives. I want to do it at home. And so I asked a college friend of mine who was a GP, and he said, "All right, I'll agree," but he was very reluctant. And then he said, "I can't do it." He said, what are you doing? You're not peasants. I said, "Anne doesn't want to have a baby in the hospital." And so I don't know how I did it, but I looked in the yellow pages, and I found an organization that took care of pregnancy among the poor. And Dr. Klotchkov I got in touch with, and he was willing to do it at home. And so our American baby was also born at home.
A girl or boy?
It was a girl. It's actually the daughter I now live with.
Oh, I see. Nice.
And then when I taught at Penn State for several years, I taught at Penn State, and she had a boy, and that.
Your daughter.
The 4th daughter.
Oh.
But she's the one I live with now.
Okay.
We have 3 daughters and 1 boy, and that was. But that's the interesting thing. My wife told the doctor that we would go to the hospital when the labor pains came. She said, "After 3 children, I know when they're going to come." And she went there, and he made it late. He was the one who wouldn't do it at home.
Oh.
And so actually she was delivered by the nurses.
Oh, in the hospital?
In the hospital.
So you went to Penn State to teach? And
I went to Penn State to teach, and I was there, but then the salary then was only $4,000 a year.
Wow.
And I had 4 children. And it was very hard making it. So
your wife stayed at home?
And my wife stayed at home, yeah. She didn't do anything. She didn't work at anything. Actually, the only kinds of work she ever did were freelance. Well, no. Toward the end, then I went from there, and then later on I went to New Paltz. And I taught at New Paltz for 20 years.
Wow. What did you teach there?
I taught English.
English.
But my specialty was words and images.
Now, we need to move on to your reflections so that the battery doesn't die on us here.
What kind of reflections?
Well,
I've been reflecting all the time.
You have been, but more specifically, how do you feel your wartime experiences affected your life?
I didn't want to spend my time in the Army, but one of the benefits, when I look back upon it, one of the benefits was meeting, as I indicated before, it was the unusual opportunity of being with men of my own age who came from all kinds of different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And once I became a professional, I only associated with people of my own economic class mm-hmm. and sophistication.
Right.
And I learned, there were so many things that I learned about Americans with respect to the United States mm-hmm. that I would never have thought of.
Right.
Because
that's a wonderful thing.
It's a wonderful thing, yeah. And people that I would not expect to be interested in, mm-hmm. but because you're forced to be interested to be with them, I found all kinds of unusual people,
nice.
As well as people I despise, and I couldn't get away from them.
Right, so you had to deal with it.
So being forced to do so, apart from the fact that I don't like danger and I really think I'm a coward, I'm not sorry that I had to spend my time in the Army.
What are some life lessons you learned from military service, do you think?
Unfortunately, the word lessons bothers me.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever learned anything from lessons.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. But what I learned from military service is to beware of the military-industrial complex. Mm-hmm. And we have been in too many wars, and since I knew even then that what is most expensive in America is providing for war. Mm-hmm. And since my politics were liberal leftist, I did not think we should have fought in Vietnam, mm-hmm. That we were obligated in Korea, mm-hmm. but I was so much against very much against our going into Iraq mm-hmm. As a result of 9/11, mm-hmm. Which is my birthday.
Yes, I remember. Yeah. How are your feelings about the military in general?
I don't like the military. I don't think there should be a military. Obviously, there has to be.
Has to be.
It has to be. But it is an obligation for people who are interested in the United States as in the politics of the United States and the political policies of the United States, that we must always investigate the military and make sure that we don't spend too much money on them, because the money gets hidden. The patriotic impulses, the patriotic feelings of the United States can hide so many bad ventures that we get into. Because once you think about the military, you say, well, we give them anything because we must never lose a war. It's that kind of... I discovered also that the young people that I was among in the Army, and I did not join any veterans organization because I knew already that the older you get when you've been in the Army, the more you become frozen in your political attitudes. Or to put it in another way, if you happen to be a liberal as a soldier, you're going to end up as a reactionary if you join a veterans organization.
You think so? Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why I never joined.
Okay.
But then, you know, I've never voted for a Republican. Mm-hmm. So obviously it's a bias, but it's the bias that I prefer.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who might view or hear this interview?
I've already said it.
Okay. Yes,
I
good.
don't have anything else to
Okay.
add.
Anything else we haven't discussed that you'd like to add? Anything you might have...
Well, I've discussed the ones that most interested me, which were what fighting on the front lines means.
Yes.
And that we tend to give the Pentagon has too much power, and we should stay out of any reason, any provocation of war. The last thing the United States should do in Jeffersonian in the Jeffersonian attitude, which was that we should constantly amend the Constitution because time will change what we think we've established that was worth doing. So you have to amend it you have to look at it again and make new decisions. But armies are awful. There shouldn't be any war, but we have to solve conflicts. So diplomacy is much more worth engaging in than using force because we know we have it. So I'm very much against armies, but I'm not sorry that I ended up serving the way I did.
There's anything you did during your period that you regret?
Yes, but I won't tell you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Irving. I really appreciate your sharing all your experiences, and thank you so much for your service.
You're welcome.
Thank
you. I brought all kinds of things, so you don't need any material.
I'm going to turn this off now. Thank you very much, and then we'll take some pictures.
Okay.
Thank you.